Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to this week's Talking Heads podcast. TT continued on the other side this week, but there was still a variety of topics to discuss aside from the races, including the planning committee and the location of the horse trams. But we started the week with the idea of regeneration in the island's towns and villages. Here's Stu Peters with more.
Should the island's regeneration committees take on more responsibility for growing the local economies? Chief Minister Alan Bell has announced a pilot scheme to enable the 6 local regeneration committees to take on a wider remit. Government says the move is in recognition of the success of regeneration schemes in the Isle of Man's towns and villages. Under the new scheme, established regeneration committees would be expanded to become local economic committees. They'll be tasked with supporting economic growth, gathering local economic statistics, identifying priority projects for vacant sites and pointing out where land use allocations could be changed. The Ramsey Regeneration Committee will be the first to carry out a trial of taking on the wider remit, with the Town's Commissioners considering introducing a new role of Town Centre Manager. Mr Bell told James Davis he's pleased with the progress made by the regeneration programme so far.
The idea now is, because these local committees have worked so well, and these local committees consist of the regional MHKs, the local authorities and indeed the Chamber of Trades in those various areas. They've worked extremely well together. We don't want to lose that cooperation and that energy, and so we think the next step would logically be to convert those committees into local economic promotion committees. We have to recognise that whilst the Isle of Man economy has been very, very successful and is still growing now, there has been a disproportionate focus of investment in the Douglas and Eastern area. So this is an opportunity now for the other regions on the island, who perhaps have been lagging behind on job creation in their areas, to bring greater focus on their own regions to attract investment, which otherwise might just automatically, by default, fall into Douglas.
Do you think expanding the remit of the local regeneration committees is a good idea? Or could that lead to even more bureaucracy and less actual action? Have the regeneration projects carried out around the island already helped to improve the economies of the island's towns and villages? Or have they changed the aesthetics of some areas without actually any noticeable increase in footfall? Are the improvements necessary even if certain projects are not likely to generate any increased interest in the area? Or should every project be based purely on its potential to improve the local economy? First comment about regeneration. Stu, without doubt, the extension of the existing scheme is an excellent idea. The more of these ground level working bodies, the better. Well done, Chief Minister. Well, I never thought that would be our first text of the day. Somebody congratulating the Chief Minister. Marvellous. If all regeneration had to pass a business case, then quality of life items such as art and sculptures and green spaces wouldn't go ahead. That would be a shame, as cultural, spiritual benefits are surely a good thing. You're absolutely right, Pete. I don't think it will replace the regeneration work and like you say, art, sculptures and things like that. It might just make them think about it in a different way, and I'm pretty sure it won't actually mean that certain things won't go ahead. It just might inform the way that they do it. Regeneration is great, but surely keeping areas, especially pavements, clean is more inviting. Ramsey's really dirty, and don't start me on the Villa Esplanade, says Brenda in Ramsey. Well, it's funny because I had two of my grandchildren and the parents over a couple of weeks ago, so I had a couple of days off, if you remember, and we spent a day in Ramsey, and I wasn't particularly aware of it being grubby. I thought it was looking really quite good in Ramsey. And also the villa, we caught the horse tram. Yes, I know, me on a horse tram. I thought the children would like it, they were scared. Caught the horse tram down at the terminus and rode as far as the Gaiety Theatre for an ice cream, and I wasn't particularly aware of the Villa Esplanade being grubby. Now, the regeneration of the towns here on the Isle of Man, all fine and well and look nice, but how about a variety of shops? Did you know that Ramsey has at least 6 cafes but not one dedicated shoe shop? Port Erin doesn't even have a men's clothes shop. I think there should be more incentives for shops to open out of town. If you're going to be benevolent dictator for life, can I be your advisor, says Pip. Yes, of course you can, Pip. I'm all for devolution or relocation of the powers back to the local authorities, but will these committees be funded by reductions in the DED staff or from the rates? Wouldn't that be nice? Developers should be made to grass over and provide seating on sites, often waiting years as eyesore, says Tom. I agree entirely, Tom. Stu, you must be just like the majority of people who just don't see what's under your nose. Next time you're out, just look down, says Brenda in Ramsey. Oh, this is about the poor state of cleanliness in the Villa Colonnade and in Ramsey. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not picking a fight with you, Brenda. I agree that places need to be kept nice and clean. But, whose responsibility is that? Is it not partly down to the people who use our streets, not just throwing rubbish willy-nilly and spitting out chewing gum and things like that? So I don't know whether or not it's anybody's fault, necessarily, if places aren't kept clean and tidy. We can't have staff on hand 24/7, can we, keep them clean? So I take your point. It's just that, like I say, I didn't actually notice what you're talking about. I thought that Ramsey looked super, and I thought the Villa Colonnade looked nice as well. But, all right, next time I'll look at my feet a bit more. How good it is to hear Alan Bell, Chief Minister, and Ramsey MHK encouraging closer working together to generate economic growth, says somebody else. David, I think.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Does the Planning Committee need a political chair? That was something that was up for debate on Tuesday.
The Chief Ministers defended the decision to appoint a former minister as chairman of the Planning Committee. Last week it was announced that Douglas East MHK Chris Robertshaw has been appointed to the role, just 3.5 months after resigning as Minister of Policy and Reform.
I have had a lifelong interest in the built environment, so I look forward to playing my part. It's a bit of a cliche, really, to say the Isle of Man where you can, but I think despite that, we need to keep that in focus. And certainly, as the new chairman of the Planning Committee, I'll be both being very mindful of the rules and regulations, but also the determination that we've got to push things forward and be mindful of the importance of our economy.
As we've heard, Chief Minister Alan Bell has defended that appointment.
I think the experiment with a non-political chair has worked reasonably well. I thank Mr Evans for the work he's done as the sort of lay chairman, if you want to call him that. But I still think it's important to have a political chair of planning, a politician who is very much focused and aware of what government's priorities are, and particularly in relation to the urgent need now to grow the economy. And I think Mr Robertshaw has only recently left government, or left the Council of Ministers, and is very au fait with the priorities that Council has set, and particularly I think he recognises the urgency, as I say, of boosting the economy. And I think working now alongside Mr Evans and the committee, we will have a good planning committee there which will respond to what the island needs for the future.
Is a political chair of the planning committee necessary, or should the appointment be free from the political arena? Is the appointment of Mr Robertshaw, who's not a member of any government department, a good compromise? Does the planning system, along with the committee, need an overhaul, or is the system working fine as it is? Tell us what you think, which is exactly what Harry did a couple of minutes ago, and he joins us on the line. Harry, good afternoon.
I think it's another example of the current government it's like the blind leading the blind, Stu.
Oh.
I mean, you've had Mr Robertshaw, 1 minute you're a baker or a butcher, a candlestick maker. Mr Robertshaw come out when he resigned and said that he thought that the government was dysfunctional.
Okay.
So what is he doing there, going back in again?
Well, yeah, I think he's very keen to say that he's not going to be part of government as such. I mean, he sees this as a dedicated job that's outside of Comyn.
Well, yes, but I just think it needs new blood in there, and I don't really think that it needs somebody in this position personally. I wouldn't put anybody there if I was Chief Minister, I don't think.
So you think it should be a non-political role?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. Somebody outside that's just concerned with the Isle of Man as outside government or outside a political role.
Yeah.
Just an independent position for somebody that can look at things and decide, not because they're trying to be good and they're getting brownie points from somebody else. Truly independent,
All right, fair dues. Thank you very much for your call today, Harry. It's good talking to a new voice. Let's just press that button and talk to Dave in Ballasalla. Hello, Dave.
I agree entirely with what Harry's just said. But, at the end of the day, we will not here, government-wise, be happy until Alan Bell has got control of everything. Now, you've got to look that the Planning Authority, the Planning Committee, and the town and country planners, including the Director of Planning, they've all been away and served their time as universities in planning. The Town and Country Planning Act, per se, is a very, very serious piece of legislation. Here's a man now that just wants to walk all over it and overrule it.
I must admit, I find it strange, and I don't know anything about planning. I've got very limited experience of it, but it does seem strange to me that, if I wanted to buy an old car park in Douglas, turn it into a block of flats or something like that, then I'd put in a planning application and they might say yes. The local residents might complain and say, no, we'd rather have the car park. So then an appeal is heard, isn't it? And an expert is brought over at some point who looks at the whole thing and says, yeah, actually, the residents are right. It shouldn't be turned into a block of flats. But that can be then overturned by the chairman of the... And I don't get it. It just seems, why go to all those lengths to get a planning inspector to come and look at something if one of our politicians can just overturn it anyway?
I served quite a lot of years as a commissioner.
Sure.
We had many planning issues where we had independent inquiries.
I think I raised this with Phil Gorn a while ago when he was in and said exactly the same thing. Why do we go to all the expense of getting these highly expert people over if you're just going to disregard them? And I think it was Phil Gorn, I might be wrong, said, well, because they don't really know the Isle of Man. Well, if that's the case, why bother bringing them over in the first place?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they say, oh, well, we've got to be seen to be doing something. But that's not the issue, Stuart. At the end of the day, you've got planning inspectors, you have very, very highly paid people in the civil service who've served a lot of years in town and country planning.
All right, Dave, thank you very much for calling today. Some good points there. And we're talking about planning, whether or not the chairman of the planning committee needs to be a politician or not. He was, then he wasn't, and now he is again. What do we think about that? Planning should be independent, not have the involvement of a political control freak, says James. Mark calls me to task on this about my comments about NIMBYism. Stu said the idea of NIMBYism isn't some sort of unreasonable position to be scorned and ridiculed, as many do. It's simply an example of people exerting their democratic right to object to any proposal that may adversely affect them, not wanting an industrial plant or business park, say, next to the property you bought because of its countryside views is a perfectly acceptable thing to try and protect. To give an example, developers, another oxymoron, have only their profit motive in mind when they choose to rip up more countryside instead of areas otherwise zoned for their schemes. A so-called NIMBY is an important break on uncontrolled building. Well, yes, I suppose so, in some ways. It's just that, again, the common good, we are constantly told that we're desperately short of first-time buyer housing, but, people who live in posh houses don't want to have cheap houses built next door to them. And I don't know how reasonable that is, to be honest. But I'm not going to fall out with you about it, certainly. Stu, this is a frightening proposal. The area plans clearly set out the blueprint for development on the island. In my personal experience, this has been ignored and overruled by political decisions made in the past by the minister with the responsibility. Are we, the public, to be denied any form of protective guideline as set out in the island's strategic plan? Regards from Neil. Thank you, Neil. Somebody who knows about these things is Oncon MHK David Quirk, who joins us on the line. Hello, David.
My major thing was and I don't want to defend Mr. Robertshaw, only time will tell, and I have a question down for Timble in the future, is that if he's going to be such a dictator and a ruler, it'll be examined in a public domain because the committee sits in public.
Yeah.
The chairman sits in public, and he has three other people alongside him, three this side, three the other side. So he has a committee. Now, every applicant can actually go and listen if their application is either approved, discussed, or turned down. So they will see whether, they'll see it in the flesh. They'll see whether anybody's circumventing policy statements. They'll see what the officers' reports are going to say. It's all in the public domain. Time will tell, because I'm sure we'll be looking over his shoulder as well, never mind everybody else.
Thank you very much for your call, David. Stu, if Chris Robertshaw wants a job, he could investigate the black hole into which the area plans for the island have disappeared. Our strategic plan for the whole island dates from 2007. We have a southern area plan from 2013. Since then, no apparent activity north, east or west, says Muriel. On a lighter note, perhaps we should have more people who are considered bananas. This stands for building absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. Or perhaps a sobby, some other backyard, or even caveman, citizens against virtually everything. Regards from Mark. Down with this kind of thing, or whatever, yeah.
The Nation Station. Manx Radio.
Plans to introduce charges for parking in designated disabled parking bays divided opinion when they were announced at the end of May. And this week, Douglas Council defended the decision to introduce the charge.
Charges were brought in just over a week ago as the council took on the running of the Chester Street and Drumgold Street car parks from the Department of Infrastructure. The move brings charges for parking in designated disabled spaces in the car park into line with other spaces there. The announcement, which only a few days before the introduction of the charges, angered many residents. Douglas Council leader David Christians defended the move and refuted some of the claims that had been made about the charge.
We'd received numbers of complaints from people that said there was people coming into work and parked in those spaces for the duration of the day, and when they came along, quite often they couldn't get on a disabled space. We're also aware of abuses where it may not even be the disabled person who was using the car, but they had a badge on, was using those spaces and not paying for them. So we felt it was only fair that as badge holders get their badge because of their disability, not on the grounds of the level of income that they've got, that everybody should pay. But quite clearly what's been said during the course of the last couple of weeks, and we have listened to what's been on the radio, and I've scrutinised closely social media to see what people are saying about it. Quite clearly, people with a disability are disadvantaged because it can take them longer to do things. So I've instructed officers to bring forward a report to the relevant committee later on this month, which will be looking at ways to try and ease it for them. So, for example, in Drumgold Street and Chester Street, which are mainly shoppers' car parks, I would say, we'd be looking where if they purchase a ticket for 2 hours, they would actually have 3 hours before they'd be liable to any other charge being put on them. Within the barriered car parks, which is Bottleneck and Shaw's Brow, which tend to be more the ones that are used by workers from the evidence that we've gathered, we've got a position there where we can issue a card and people can actually preload the card beforehand, which would mean they wouldn't even need to go near the paint display machines to actually purchase a ticket, and it would just be deducted each time they went back out of the car park for however long that they were there.
Should the public have been given more notice of the decision to introduce these charges? Or since the decision to introduce them had already been taken, would that have made little difference? Have drivers now accepted the charge, or has it put off some blue badge holders from using the car parks? We've got Eddie on line too. Hello, Eddie.
Well, if the handicapped people have got to pay, then surely all the officials should have to pay as well.
Yes.
It's simple as that, because to me they're being hypocrites.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether or not the councillors do get free parking. Somebody suggested it on the programme, I think last week or the week before, when we first talked about this.
Well, the mayor does, because there's a place right outside the town hall.
Oh, there is, yeah.
Council officials do. So if it's good enough for ordinary people, then surely it's good enough for everybody, including the MHKs as well. They've allowed it to happen.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Eddie. Thank you very much for your call. Got our friend Sylvia on. Hi, Sylvia.
Hello, Stu.
Yeah.
I just had a thought. Why don't they have 3 different coloured badges?
Oh.
One for disabled drivers.
Yes.
One for disabled passengers.
Oh, I see.
One for disabled workers.
So if you're a disabled passenger, then you would still need to be able to park somewhere, but the driver himself might be able-bodied, so you would know because it was the right coloured pass.
That's right. And the other thing is the disabled workers are going to be hit very hard, aren't they, if they work an 8-hour day, paying £1.85 an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big chunk out of your earnings, isn't it, for parking?
Yeah.
That's dreadful, I think.
All right, Sylvia, thank you very much for your call. Let's go to line 2 because we've got John on. Hello, John.
A lot of people can park on a disabled area, jump out of their cars, and you think there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
And they can walk down into Marks and Spencer's and walk round, but doesn't mean they can walk the length of Strand Street.
Gotcha.
They can get out of the car, walk across the car park, but anything further than that, the pain sets in. So therefore, they can't walk the distance.
So what you're saying is that we've got to be careful not to judge people too quickly and assume that they're able-bodied.
You look at people and they jump out of a car and you think, my God, there's nothing much wrong with them. But you just don't know.
Okay.
You just don't know.
£1.80 an hour is just as costly for an able-bodied worker as a disabled worker, and it's vaguely patronising to assume that if you're disabled, you're unable or unwilling to pay for your parking. Please just ensure that there are suitably accessible parking spaces. That's fair dues as well.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
You're listening to the latest Talking Heads podcast, featuring highlights from the programme over the past week. Would you welcome stricter laws on smoking in the island? Following on from the ban in smoking in enclosed public spaces, which was introduced in March 2008, the Department of Health and Social Care is progressing more legislation relating to smoking and tobacco products. And that was something which was up for debate on the programme on Wednesday.
Proposed legislation which could strengthen the island's smoking laws has made its way through its stages in the House of Keys. At the end of last month, MHKs passed the third reading of the Public Health Tobacco Amendment Bill 2015, the Public Health Tobacco Amendment Bill 2015. The bill will now be dealt with by the Legislative Council. The proposed legislation covers bans on cigarette vending machines, tobacco advertising and the display of tobacco products in retail outlets. It would also pave the way for the introduction of fixed penalty fines for smoking in cars when children are present.
I know we'll get accused of being the nanny state, etc., but I think as people become more aware of the damage that passive smoking can do, I mean, there's a very good picture which has been used fairly recently with a mother in the car with a child in the baby seat in the back of the car, and all the unseen smoke that you can't really see, and even though people try and smoke out through the window when they've got a child, it's passive damage that they're doing to their children. And as I think we become more aware of it, then I think if we were to say no one can smoke, then yes, we would be taking away people's rights to make that decision on whether to smoke or not. But we're not. We're just trying to reduce its promotion, and we're trying to protect young children who they haven't got a voice. They can't say, no, please, Mum and Dad, don't smoke in front of me. The damage you're causing me, could be irreparable. They are having to put up with it, and we're just giving them some protection. We're asking people to smoke. If you're going to smoke, please do it responsibly and don't affect the health of your children. Prevention is better than cure. I think it was Perseus that said that, over 2,000 years ago, and nothing has changed during that period of time. If we can prevent people from getting these illnesses, then A, it gives them a far better quality of life, and B, from a pound, shilling and pence point of view, we're not having to treat some of these horrible diseases in our hospital at high cost to the taxpayer. And I know people will say, oh, but we pay a tax on cigarettes and smoking, but the cost of some of these cancer drugs is in the tens of thousands of pounds. It's not a cheap treatment to give, and horrible consequences for those people who are unfortunate enough to get these diseases.
With the smoking ban already in place and more restrictions to the current legislation necessary, is a ban on smoking in cars when children are present a common sense move? I think most of us would agree it is. Would you like to see the legislation go even further than cars, maybe? Would a ban on smoking in open public places be something that you'd support? What about smoking in the home? Anne's been in touch. Stu, she says, as above, what's the minister's excuse for non-smokers who get lung cancer? The heading of her email, non-smokers get lung cancer too. Yeah, that's true. I do agree with not smoking around children, but this does perplex me. What is causing non-smokers to get lung cancer? Kindest regards from Anne. Very good question, and I mean, this is something that perplexes me as well, in that when I was a young fellow, when I started work at 16 in the early 70s, pretty much everybody smoked. I mean, there were a few people, but it was the exception, people who didn't smoke, to the rule. And when I watch programmes like Mad Men now, set in the early 70s, and you see people with ashtrays overflowing on the desks, it takes you back, and it's quite shocking, actually. You'd go into an office and you could barely see people the other side of the room through this fog of cigarette smoke. And now, I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable that we used to do that. But we did, and that was considered normal. But nowadays, very few people smoke by comparison with those times. But still, cancer rates don't seem to be going down. If anything, they're going up. And you sort of think, why? If they ban smoking, it won't work. A non-smoker also, the MHK talking about the cost of treatment is expensive. There's lots of money going into charities. That was a bit off of him saying it's too expensive. Okay, that's a thought, I suppose. Hey, Stu, the cancer rate's going up because all us adults sat in our living rooms while our parents smoked themselves silly when we were children. Do you know, I hate to admit it, but you might have a point there, Jonesy. Yeah, I suppose there is a lag, isn't there, between cause and effect. Stu, my mum spent a lot of time in the company of smokers, although she never smoked herself. She died of cancer of the salivary gland. A consultant told me this was directly related to passive smoking, says Kate. I'm sorry to hear that, Kate. I just wonder whether or not it's an easy answer for doctors. Have you been around smokers? Yes, I have. Oh, well, that'll be it then. Stu, as an ex-smoker, I'm aware that we should protect people from second-hand smoke, but government needs to be careful, as this decision to ban smoking in cars where children are present is on one hand a wise one, but on the other the government's taking away the person's ability to make good, sound, informed decisions. Is this the way to the future, the government controlling absolutely every part of our lives and we can't make any decisions? Wasn't that what the world wars were about? Also, if there are less smokers, then people are going to live longer. Who'll support the people living into their 80s, 90s and 100s, says Pip. Yes, I think some good points there as well, Pip. Although, and I mean, up until fairly recently, I wouldn't think twice about smoking if I was driving a car and there was a child in the back seat, because I'd open the window and presume that all the smoke went out of the window. Having seen that commercial where they say, just because you can't see it doesn't mean that there isn't smoke or there aren't particulates in the air if you're smoking in a car. So that is one where education has worked, and I can see the point now that it's not a wise thing to do. But it is, I do worry that this is the thin end of various wedges, really. This from Joan, she says, Stu, before doctors and medicine came along, the human race was like all the other animals, survival of the fittest. Who knows the long-term effects of taking medicines? Perhaps it's making the human race weaker, says Joan. The thing is, Joan, at some point you've got to decide who you're going to trust about things like this.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Now, where should the horse tram tracks be located? The debate over proposals to refurbish Douglas Promenade continued this week, with particular reference to that issue.
Can any plans put forward for the refurbishment of Douglas Promenade please everyone? The Department of Infrastructure has been receiving comments from the public over its proposed shared space layout. Urban design specialist Ben Hamilton-Bailey has drawn up the plans that would see pavements and roads blend together and do away with traffic lights altogether. But those plans have sparked many concerns. The initiative would also see the horse trams move to the promenade walkway. But should Tynwald members be able to vote on individual aspects of the scheme when it's debated by the court? That's something Malou and Santon MHK Graham Cregeen is hoping to secure support for next week. Mr Cregeen wants separate votes on 3 issues: the promenade roadway, the horse tram track, and Douglas Borough Corporation continuing to run and finance the horse trams for a minimum of 20 years. And it seems the proposals for the relocation of the horse tram tracks haven't found favour with all the members of Douglas Council. Councillor Stephen Pitts put forward a motion in Douglas Council yesterday. It read that in the event that the horse trams are relocated onto the promenade walkway, the council offer the horse tram undertaking to the Isle of Man government for a nominal fee as a heritage attraction, along with an agreement for long-term use of any land concerned with such undertaking, but that said land remain in the ownership of the council. That motion was seconded by Councillor David Ashford, will now be referred to the Executive Committee for consideration. The committee has been tasked with reporting back on the matter to the Council by October the 14th. So, should the horse trams remain where they are, or is the walkway the best place for them? Would you like to see the horse trams move into government ownership or stay in the hands of Douglas Corpy? Will any schemes to refurbish the promenade really ever please all the people, or is that an impossible task? Is there maybe a case that all this prevarication is playing into the hands of government who've not got any money and don't want to spend anything for a good while? Let's go to Line 4, and we've got Gillian on. Hello, Gillian.
As you know, I have had a season ticket for the horse trams for years.
Yes, I know you're a big fan of the horse trams.
If they want to change it, I don't think it's a very good idea of them going onto the walkway for 2 or 3 reasons.
Okay.
One is, like the gentleman saying, if any paper comes across, or if it's a rough day, the wave will come over the seawall, the horses will get drenched, and also the passengers.
That's a valid point. Yeah, I'll give you that.
On a rough day. Also, people who have got dogs, they may not keep them under control. What happens if a dog goes and attacks a horse?
It could do it now in the middle of the road, couldn't it?
Not with all the traffic, no, going up and down. If they want to do anything that's better, keep it off the walkway, have a single track going down the road. They're only running for 4 months of the year. That's all, May to September. I'm sure that they can get round that and make it peaceful for everybody.
All right, Gillian, fair point.
Thank you, Stu.
Thanks for calling. Stu, I've been to look at the proposals. I've also seen similar setups in cities across Europe, several with electric trams every 10 minutes. It works. The only thing I believe should be done is a couple of controlled crossings added. This is just usual Manx crab attitude. Let's just get on with it. A child on a pavement can see a dog across the road and run out. Up to parents to take control. Yes, finally. Just another excuse for those that don't like change, says Peter. Good stuff, thank you. Ian called, the horse trams are not heritage, they're a failed business which hasn't made any profit since the late 1970s. Year after year they've been costing the Douglas ratepayers too much money, and it's one step away from cruelty having the horses pull those trams up and down the prom. They're costing ratepayers near enough £500,000 a year. Well, that's another point of view. Good afternoon. The idea that a shared space along Douglas Promenade may or may not work. It's an appealing idea, but I feel it would make sense to try it out before the diggers go on the prom. A good location to try out the idea is surely Victoria Street Street from Colburns to the Victoria Clock. Temporary road signs and use of the abundant road markers and boxes could create the layout at low cost. Users could give immediate feedback. That's from the Douglas Butty. In the Netherlands, where trams are common, they often run down the middle of the road. Passengers cross the traffic to get on and off without issue. We shouldn't spend money moving the tracks, says Steve. How about let's not do anything? Let's just go back to eating spuds and herring, spend nothing, get left behind, cracking. I know we don't get visitors apart from Carnage Fortnight, but we still have to keep up with other resorts, so just give up, says Ian. Just get on with doing the prom before this wasteful government spends the money on another useless idea, says somebody else. Stu, put wheels on trams, no lines needed then, says Sue. Well, yeah, and I think that there's a lot of merit in that as a suggestion, Sue, but I expect that these things are so old that they wouldn't easily take pneumatic or rubber wheels, and people would be up in arms then that it's not heritage. Stu, horse trams, car for man, sorted, says Mal. How Mr. Cragine has changed his tune now that he's not in the Comin. If we start voting on all individual parts of big schemes, we'll never ever get past the planning stages, let alone get them built. Let's just get the trams onto the South Quay as part of regenerating that sorry mess, says Alan. Similar scheme in the UK has now had to reinstate pelican crossings in order to assist pedestrians to safely cross. With snow on the roads, the crossing road markings are obscured, and on rainy days, pedestrians were being splashed by vehicles passing. Crossing roads in TT Fortnight would be very dangerous. Best idea is to leave everything as it is, just redo the roadway and leave the horse trams where they are now, says Ken. OK, back to the lines, and let's see what Eddie makes of it. Eddie, good afternoon.
Well, we're talking about spending £21 million here.
True.
Nobody's bothering to do the sea wall, Stu. The sea wall now from where Butch's tent is, from there, from the jetty, all the way over to the War Memorial, I think there's 5 loads of steps. I think 4 of them now have been fenced off because they're in a dangerous state. And what people seem to forget is the promenade all the way through to Back Strand Street is reclaimed land.
Yes.
And if we don't do the seawall, then we're going to spend £21 million to see it get swept away again, aren't we?
Isn't that part of it? I can't remember seeing that as part of the plans.
Every time we mention about the seawall, he says that he'll take that into consideration later.
Right, gotcha.
Surely that's got to be done first.
You would have thought that that would have to be part of the scheme, certainly. I think that's sensible.
And plus, where you're talking about putting the trams over on the far end on the Queen's Prom, the water comes over there quite regular.
Yeah.
As you must know yourself if you use the promenade.
Now and then, yeah.
So basically, them lines would have to be done all the time. You'd have to have people there taking the stones out between the lines every time they came over.
Ah, yeah,
You're
that's
talking
a thought.
lots of money all the time. So basically, why don't they just resurface it? And if you want to do it properly, go back to how it was.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about places like Blackpool. I mean, the electric trams, whether or not they get a lot of... they get awful weather over there. I'm wondering whether or not they have a problem with stones in the lines.
No, because you've got a big sea wall, haven't you?
I see.
What you got to remember is, on the Queen's Promenade, you're talking about 2-3 foot drop. So when you get an easterly inshore wind...
Yeah.
It just blows all the sand comes across. You've seen it yourself when you go along there.
Yeah. All right, you make some good points, Eddie. Thank you for calling.
All the best, mate.
Cheers, fella. Bye-bye. Hi, Stu. It's been said that a camel is a horse designed by a committee, i.e. if everybody has a say in designing the promenade, the result may be chaotic, says David H. Seawall's been damaged since the 1950s by the look of it. Watched an old Pathé video on YouTube from that period. You can see a large area of wall that's damaged in the background with 2 teenagers running into the sea for a swim, says Rich. Yeah, I think I saw that clip as well. Stu, no-brainer to somebody in business, losing £300,000 a year for 4 months' work. I thought we were having to cut our cloth to balance the books. I don't even know why they're discussing it. Get rid of the trams, it's old hat, says Rob in Port St Mary. I heard on Manx Radio that they want to promote the island as an island of nostalgia. As part of that strategy, I'd like to see the horse trams relocated to Ramsey Prom, Moorag Park to the Swing Bridge. Now, that'd be a good idea, where there's loads of space and it's much quieter. Douglas Prom redevelopment is meant to be for the next 100 years. According to government chaps at the Sea Terminal exhibition, they're not allowed to touch the sunken gardens. That's ridiculous. In the great scheme of things, think about the fuss over moving the Victoria Clock a few metres. If it's a 100-year scheme, the whole promenade should be up for redevelopment. Peel Holdings would do it in no time. Stu, in reality it seems nuts that the horse trams should not be part of the integrated government-run vintage tram and train network. However, horse trams should not be on the walkway. There should be a single line with passing places in the centre or the edge of the walkway. Putting trams on the walkway would make a fantastic amenity completely unusable and unsafe. Prom definitely needs to be rebuilt from the foundations up, but the layout needs very little amendment. Yeah, but the layout, like I said earlier on, was designed when we had millions of visitors every year, so surely it does need, a ground-up rethink, doesn't it? The horse trams, walkway, roads and gardens should be retained as is. Then this needs to be done as quickly as possible. It's gone on long enough already, says Ali.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Well, that's it for the latest look back at some of the highlights from this week's Talking Heads. Our thanks to everyone who contributed to the programme. You can get involved in the discussion yourself each weekday by calling, texting or emailing us between midday and 2 p.m. Or you can catch up in your own time using the on-demand service on manxradio.com. You'll also find a daily update of the topics up for discussion on the website too. Or you can find that information by liking the Facebook page, that's Talking Heads with Stu Peters, or by following Stu Manx on Twitter. If you can't add your thoughts to the discussion while the programme's on the air each day, the best place to have your say is on the Facebook page. Just find the relevant topic and add your comments. But remember, as ever, what you say must be within reason. And you can suggest a topic for discussion on the programme anytime by emailing talk@manxradio.com. But that's it for this week, so until next week, goodbye.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.